Hello, my name is John Schneider. When I was a kid, I used to visit my Grandma Vi in the Jersey Bayshore area, and I'd take 8mm movies of my family and their friends. In fact, I was the family filmmaker. Today I live here, but traded my film camera for video, and recently shot this tugboat in the Shrewsbury River. Welcome to Jersey Bayshore country. Where is the Jersey Bayshore? Let's get oriented by starting with the big picture. It's somewhere in here, part of the universe, and definitely part of our world. But it's like no place I've ever experienced. And as soon as we land, I'll show you around. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Jersey Bayshore Country. While we frequently explore our local history in this area by looking back a few hundred years, we have yet to go way back into the prehistoric age, which is millions of years ago. And it's hard to comprehend that concept. It's like infinity, millions, and sometimes billions. We think in terms of thousands or hundreds as a long time ago, but we're going to go back millions of years. Now, don't be too concerned about this trip backwards, because I'm going to be your guide, and I am qualified to lead you back through time. Actually, my college degree from George Washington University and Hunter College was in geophysics. And even as a kid, I was always interested in how the earth was formed and what was below my feet and where did I come from. I remember my grandfather, who was a bit of an inventor and an explorer in his own right, made a diagram for me when I was young. He showed me the core of the earth and the mantle and the crust and explained to me how it all worked. And my dad, too, created what looked like an ant farm between two pieces of glass showing different layers of sediment. I remember heading out west with my family to gather rocks and fossils for my collection. It was fascinating, and it still is. And while the Jersey Bayshore may not be as interesting to study as the Grand Canyon or as dramatic in grandeur as the Petrified Forest, we do have clues all around us about what life was like millions of years ago right here in Jersey Bayshore country. So I'd like to start our story not as some remember from school with volcanoes and lava flowing over the surface of the earth, but as mostly a water world with some very lush environments, mixed in a few volcanoes spewing lava and smoke and steam into the atmosphere. We're going to go back to a time when our country didn't look much like it does today, because most of the middle of America was a shallow sea, and the west coast was separated from the east coast. Plate tectonics were shifting land masses together and apart, and sea level was rising and falling. Take a look at this animation as the world changes, and that little spot right there is New Jersey, and try to follow that, because New Jersey was mostly underwater. Now, geologists tell us that the area along the coast of New Jersey, which includes Raritan Bay and parts of southern New York, is part of a large outcropping of sediment in a wide swath of land from Carteret to Trenton, which was developed mostly during, here we go, the Cretaceous period, which was about, get your arms around this one, it was about 65 to 135 million years ago. That was the Cretaceous period. And there are other periods before it and after it, but we're going to look mostly at this period. This was a very large period of time. And it's divided into the early Cretaceous, which was more toward the hundreds of millions of years, followed by the late Cretaceous, which was relatively near to our present time, only about 60 to 70 million years ago. And that that's the period we're generally going to talk about. Why do we want to talk about this period? Well, the first reason is we can't focus on everything beyond the scope of this program, and quite frankly, beyond my pool of knowledge. But I want to focus on it because I believe the late Cretaceous period was one of the most interesting periods of our prehistory. Now, today we can see evidence of the Cretaceous period in a wide band of sediment which runs from the southwest section of our state to the northeast and to Monmouth County. The late Cretaceous represents a period in which some of the highest sea levels existed when global temperatures may have been the warmest known in the last billion years of Earth's history. The sea level continued to oscillate, which meant that it went up and down until about 15 million years ago when the last great high water level occurred. How do we know this? Well, the evidence is represented by the extensive marine sand and gravel deposits in our area. We were underwater. The gravel in this sediment also lies on top of many of the highest hills throughout the region, like the gravel of Beacon Hill. Some of this gravel was used in the construction of the New Jersey Turnpike, as well as the Garden State Parkway. New Jersey's coastal plain, as geologists call it, represents sediment which was underwater for millions of years. And during the recent past, this coastal plain was mined for bog iron, sand for glass, clay for bricks and ceramics, glauconite for fertilizer, and titanium, which is located in deposits of sand. By the way, you've probably seen lots of glauconite in this area. There's lots of it. It's characteristically green, and it's got very low weathering resistance. And if you've seen some greenish rocks in this area from time to time, probably looking at glauconite. So after the mid-Miocene period, about 5 million years ago, the sea level dropped really significantly and global climates cooled. This was about 5 million years ago now, which resulted in some of the first continental glaciers or ice sheets. And sediments have been found which are downwardly angled toward the Atlantic Ocean from New Jersey and extend to the edge of the continental shelf. And most of these sediments comprise layers of silt, sand, and clay. But some of the gravel and iron-cemented sediments can be found in the hills of highlands, Atlantic highlands, Telegraph Hill, Mount Holly, Arnie's Mount. The height of these hills was caused by what geologists refer to as glacial rebound. Now, meanwhile, ironstone conglomerate from the Tertiary period lies along the crest of the hills and overlies a layer of marine rocks formed from mud during our beloved Cretaceous period, which was about 65 to 135 million years ago. Now, when the sea level was lower during the Pleistocene period, Raritan Bay wasn't what it is today. During the Pleistocene period, Raritan Bay was a river valley with a high valley wall on the south side of the combined Hudson-Raritan rivers, which flowed through the valley and into the ocean. This was a valley. There was no bay. The water levels were very low, and sometimes water levels can be very low when there are ice sheets and glaciers and for other reasons as well. The ancient river system, which ran through this valley, was buried a long, long time ago by younger sediments, including the recent deposits associated with Sandy Hook. But what fascinates me, however, are the life forms which inhabited our area during, can you remember? The Cretaceous period, 65 to 135 million years ago. But we're going to look at the part of the Cretaceous period that was about 65 million years ago. While much of life was a lot different than how it looks today, our beloved clams and oysters go way back in time and pretty much look the same as they did. Cretaceous fossils of clams are fairly common in our area, especially oysters in ancient oyster reefs. Snails, ammonoids, belemnites, and claws of ancient shrimp are also very common. And if you go to Poracy Park, which is on a little bit of an elevation, you can find sharks' teeth and other marine-related fossils there. So let's take a few minutes to explore Poracy Park and imagine we're living in the Cretaceous period, even though this particular area would have been a shallow sea and we would have been underwater. Just imagine that you hear dinosaurs off in the distance. A lot of this park reminds me of what we might have seen in the Cretaceous period, although a lot of the plants would have been very different. So here in Porosy Park, if you go down to the brook and dig around in the mud, you might find not only shark's teeth, but lots of other marine creatures as well. And make sure you understand the regulations. You can't go in this park with a backhoe or a big shovel or a pickaxe, maybe a trowel, or you can use your hands, or you can pick through the mud and the gravel. And when it rains, these cliffs on one side of the brook yield a few fossils. So it's sometimes good to come out after a rainstorm. If you've never been to Porosy Park, which is owned and operated by the Monmouth County Park System, what in the world are you waiting for? Now, another great park is Big Brook in Colts Neck and Marlborough. This is a stream that runs through a park and cuts through sediments that were deposited during the late Cretaceous. So we are in the ballpark of where we need to be. And you can see clearly the river and the mud, and they're just like Porosy Park. There's a little bit of a cliff, and a lot of the sand and the mud is red. And look what I found while I was there. I was so excited. It's called Exogyra, which is actually an extinct saltwater oyster. Exogyra lived in warm seas during the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. So I was pretty excited to find it. And remember, animals and plants are more likely to fossilize in mud than in sand, and one of the reasons is mud doesn't have a lot of oxygen in it. It'll encapsulate an animal, and the oxygen will decay the animal a lot more quickly, and so we don't see a lot of mud out near Sandy Hook. That's a little more porous, so there aren't as many fossils. Which is further evidence that we, New Jersey, were underwater. And we have had our share of dinosaurs here, because the remains of dinosaurs and other vertebrates that lived on land have been found in the Cretaceous sediments of the coastal plain of New Jersey. The fossils of marine reptiles such as mosasaurs, giant crocodiles, plesiosaurs, bony fishes, turtles, lizards, snakes, and even a wing and neck bone from petrosaur have been found within these sediments. But the most famous discovery of a fossil within this coastal plain sediment was a duck-billed dinosaur known as Hadrosaurus. Now, Hadrosaurus, if you want to see one, if you go to the Monmouth Museum, there is a replica, I believe it's a replica, skull of a Hadrosaurus. It was discovered in Haddonfield, New Jersey, hence the name Hadrosaurus. Now, Haddonfield, New Jersey, is across the river from Philadelphia, and it's one of the town's biggest claims to fame because it was the site of a great discovery, Hadrosaurus foci. And here is the plaque to prove it. Now, in 1858, someone discovered the fossilized remains of this dinosaur in a marl deposit in this small town. And just a footnote, marl or marl stone is a calcium carbonate or lime-rich mud, say mud again, or mudstone, which contains different amounts of clay and silt. And here's the man, William Parker Folk, who discovered the first nearly complete skeleton of a dinosaur in the history of the world. So needless to say, it was a great discovery. The bones of the dinosaur were immediately sent to the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, and they have been there ever since, back in 1958. It was also the first complete skeleton ever to be mounted in a museum, so lots of people went to see it. It was a big deal back in the day. It still is, I think. Today, the site of the discovery on Maple Avenue in Haddonfield is a National Historic Landmark, and it remains in a fairly natural and wild state. A small stream, now called appropriately Hadrosaurus Run, twists and turns through the ravine and eventually empties into Cooper's River, which is nearby. And like some of the other parks that we just visited, the banks of the stream are somewhat steep and are made of a muddy marl, just like the substance in which the bones were found. So it hasn't changed much. Just like the parks in Monmouth County, fossilized shark's teeth and shells are usually found after a heavy rain. And if you're really lucky, who knows, maybe you'll find the dinosaur bone of a Hadrosaurus. And there's also a place to park and a fairly primitive trail along the ravine for folks to explore and look for fossils. But again, be aware of the rules. I think you can take a small trowel and you might be limited to 6 fossils a day, but don't be going in there with a drag line and a backhoe and a dump truck.
This is not the whole dinosaur, of course. It's just a part of it. It's the base of the tail, and you're looking at a dinosaur that was probably about 6 to 7 metres long and weighed about 3 tonne, so it's quite a big animal. What we're looking at here is the base of the tail. So just to my left there, you'll have the hip, and where the leg articulates into the hip, and this is the tail tip over this way, and this is the top of the animal here, and this is the bottom of the animal here. What we have here is a row of vertebrae, the backbone, running along here, and these are the splines that come out of the vertebra and the muscles attached to the tips of these things. And right along here, this massive material here is actually part of the skin, the outer skin of the hadrosaur, which is, it's not unique, but it's very rare to find mummified skin and skin impressions, and we have them both. We've got the real skin on top and we have the impressions underneath here. It's told us a lot about what these animals look like in real life, which we can't get from just the normal bones, of course. And from this we've learnt that hadrosaurs, at least, don't have scaly skin like a snake. They have a pebbly type of skin. Their skin is made up of different sizes of pebble-like bones all together. What's special about this particular specimen is that it's articulated, for a start. And articulated means that all the bones are in the position that they were in life. A lot of people think that that's how we find dinosaurs and fossilised animals, but it's the exception, not the rule. Most times, animals, after they've died, their bones are scattered by scavengers or by water, and to find a complete animal is very special.
I thought that was interesting. So, what's important about the fossils preserved in the sediments of the coastal plain is that they record the advancement of the modern species. But they also indicate to scientists that there must have been a dramatic extinction of many species which occurred sometime between the Cretaceous and Tertiary period. Now remember, the late Cretaceous was about 65 million years ago, and then along came the Tertiary period. And the boundary between these two periods of time is well preserved throughout New Jersey. It's an important boundary because it marks severe devastation of marine fauna and the total extinction of the dinosaurs. You've heard about that, right? There are no more dinosaurs. They were wiped out pretty quickly. Now, some have suggested that much of the life during this period was wiped out by the impact of a large asteroid. But evidence of an asteroid impact is not evident along the boundary in New Jersey, so it still remains somewhat of a mystery today. Now, another geological event was the creation of Sandy Hook, which I think is interesting too. And it was different at different times in history. So this map right here is a couple of 100 years ago, and you can see how the Navesink River flows directly into the sea. And here's an artist's conception of how Sandy Hook has changed over the years. Today, the beaches of Sandy Hook still change continuously every year. During the winter, the beaches are steeper. By early spring, the sand consists of mostly quartz gravel, and the continuous wind that that occurs out there during the winter creates sand that is rich in garnet, magnetite, hematite, and some other exotic minerals. During the summer, the gravel and minerals diminish and sometimes actually disappear. On the western edge of Sandy Hook, which faces highlands, the spit, and Sandy Hook is a spit, it's not really a peninsula, so it's technically a spit. The western edge is impacted by tidal currents and waves generated by wind across Raritan Bay. Now, we talked about the Pleistocene epoch or period, and that was between 2 million and 10,000 years before today. So the Pleistocene period was a little bit closer and represented a time of some of the greatest drops in sea level in Earth's history, when huge quantities of water were trapped periodically in advancing and retreating continental ice sheets. They came and they went. And the Laurentide ice sheet was a massive sheet of ice that covered millions of square miles, including most of Canada and a large portion of the northern United States. It last covered most of North America between 20,000 and 95,000 years before the present day. So when sea level was lower during the ice ages, the Highlands was a high valley wall on the south side of the Hudson River, which flowed all the way to the sea. And this was a valley. The valley of the Raritan River was perhaps the major drainage channel along the ice front as it melted, and it drained southward between Atlantic Highlands and the Newark Basin. As some of the glaciers melted, the deeper valleys of the Hudson, Raritan and Arthur Kill, were flooded. And during the warming end of the Pleistocene and early Holocene, the area encompassing Raritan Bay changed from tundra to a landscape dominated by spruce and pine forests. And these forests gradually gave way to the modern deciduous forest in the region by mid-Holocene time. Lagoons and bays like these in the area around Sandy Hook contained oysters, hard and soft-shell clams, lobsters, blue crabs, and a variety of other invertebrates common in bays in the region today. The inner Raritan Bay began to fill in about 2,500 years ago with large oyster beds forming along the tributaries. And the sea level continued to rise about 1 foot per century and resulted in landward migration of the shoreline as much as 2 miles in some portions of the coast since colonial time. Sediment from the Raritan River, however, was filling in the valley faster than sea level could flood the shorelines. So portions of the valley that were once exposed several thousands of years ago were now buried about 150 feet deep in mud. The influx of mud helped with the development of the tidal wetlands and marshes along the south and western ends of Raritan Bay, including the wetlands preserved in Cheesequake State Park. Incidentally, sand covers the sea bottom in the lower portion of the bay, whereas mud dominates the bottom throughout the middle portion of the bay. There is some archaeological evidence suggesting we humans were already in the region at the close of the Pleistocene, about 10,000 years ago, and probably actively contributing to the mass extinction of a variety of North American wildlife species. The so-called early big game hunters vanished, but the coastal regions were resettled by peoples accustomed to village-style living in tidewater communities, which subsisted on hunting and gathering marine shellfish and eventually on agriculture. A vast number of shellfish fossils have been found around Raritan Bay and on Staten Island, a testament to the utilization of the bay for food by the Algonquin Indian tribes. These were the familiar Lenape Indians who occupied the area when early colonists arrived. And early settlers used these piles of clam and oyster shells for road construction and fertilizer. In fact, Tottenville, which is over there by Perth Amboy, which was once the capital of New Jersey, was well known for its roads, which were paved with oyster shells. Incidentally, during the 1600s, oysters grew in 2 large beds in the western end of the bay. The largest, measured oyster bed, was about a mile across and was located just beyond the mouth of the Raritan River. And the beds were contiguous with oyster beds that line the lower river estuary for as much as 5 miles upstream. In fact, the beds became so large that the Great Beds Lighthouse was built to warn ships of the underwater obstruction of these large beds of oysters. A smaller oyster colony, called the Chingarora Bed by the Lenape Indians, was located in what became today Keyport Harbor. Oysters also grew abundantly along the tributary rivers of Raritan Bay, including the East, Hudson, Navesink, and Shrewsbury rivers, as well as along most of Arthur Kill and in southern portions of Newark Bay. Eventually, the lucrative fishing industry during the 19th and early 20th centuries helped to support a stable population around the bay and aided, in part, to feed the flood of immigration. The peak of the fishing industry occurred in the late 1880s to the 1910s. Fishing and farming slowly gave way to industries including shipbuilding, ceramics, chemicals and paint manufacturing, electrolytic copper refining, and petroleum refining. In the Sayreville, New Jersey area, large pits were dug to extract the clays for ceramics and bricks, and a huge chemical dump and landfills were created to accommodate the waste. Oysters, sadly, vanished completely about the time of World War II, but efforts are being made today by a number of organizations to try to regrow them, to bring them back. I guess we could ruminate on how we humans have changed the landscape, and maybe someday an asteroid will wipe us out and the cockroaches will take over the Earth, and let's hope that never happens. Instead of dwelling on the negative, let's just really appreciate what we have and where we've come from. Our history is sometimes buried deep below our feet, and sometimes we can see it on the surface, gently reminding us of how young, how very young we really are. This part of the world, which I lovingly refer to as Jersey Bayshore country, is what we can all appreciate right now, today, in the moments of our lives we call the present. And while our time, we all know, is fleeting, our future may be coming at us very fast. After all, we're still hurtling through space on a big blue marble, which may someday land on the beach of a new planet in a distant galaxy. Well, that's it for now. I'm John Schneider, and remember, if you see me, even if I'm a grain of sand between your toes, do say hello, because, as always, nothing is more important than meeting you, even if you're an alien from another world. Bye-bye, everybody.